In this video, I want to tell you about this factory. I am absolutely fascinated by it for a few reasons. First, it played a huge role in the Allies winning World War II. Second, it was 3.5 million square feet when it was built, and at the time it was the largest building in the world. And third, it produced these B-24 bombers, which I'm also a big fan of. It was officially known as Air Force Plant 31, but most people knew it as the Willow Run Bomber Plant. There were a lot of skeptics about whether this whole project would even work, and after a very slow start, people started referring to it as Will It Run? I've read everything I could get my hands on about it, and even interviewed retired Navy Captain Randy Hutton, who literally wrote the book on Willow Run, and he still flies out of the airport next door. Let's start with him explaining the importance of this factory.
Even though it wasn't glamorous, how important was that factory in American history?
Well, the factory was just monumental. I mean, they turned out 18,000 B-24s, and if you count the Navy versions of it, it's close to 20,000 B-24s. In terms of airframe weight, that's how much an airplane weighs times the number built. It was the most produced airplane in the world until 2012, when it was surpassed by the 737. And it's amazing, the 737 was built for over 50 years, and the B-24 was only built for 4 years.
Willow Run was built in 1941, and it was the first facility to build bombers using automotive-style assembly line techniques. Here's Randy explaining the bomber it produced, the B-24.
The B-24 is a pig. If you flew the B-24 in formation for 20 minutes, it was like working out at the gym. You had to give the airplane to the other guy. And in fact, there was kind of a joke. You could tell what seat a B-24 pilot sat in by the size of his arm. If his left arm was bigger than his right arm, he flew in the left seat. And he had the little Tyrannosaurus Rex arm that he used the throttles with. If you flew in the right seat, your right arm was bigger because you had your hands on the throttles with your left hand.
But beyond the huge size of this factory and its remarkable production output, this building played a major role in World War II. And while it's not particularly well known, it has left an indelible mark on those who remember it. Randy, who I mentioned has deep roots to the area, is certainly one of them.
So your father, Andy, was actually a worker in the factory. Is that correct?
That is correct. He was a graduate of the Ford Trade School, so he was trained in all the manufacturing skills. And he went to work at Willow Run in early 42, January, February, the best I can recollect. And he worked there until June of 1945, when he lost his draft deferment as a production essential worker. And he was in the largest draft call-up of World War II. In June of 1945, they called up 400,000 people like my father who lost their defense deferments.
So this factory was built for World War II, but there was a lot of opposition even going to war following the First War. This sentiment was so powerful that the military had greatly reduced its fleet of weapons, planes, and tanks, and there was strong resistance to entering World War II. But all this changed in early December of 1941 when Japan made the worst miscalculation in the history of the world and attacked Pearl Harbor. Americans did not want to fight, but they certainly weren't going to back down from one either. The problem was that the prevailing anti-war mentality naturally led to considerably diminished weaponry. Not only were their guns and ammunitions depleted, they had limited boats, tanks, and bombers, particularly in comparison to the heavily armed German, Italian, and Japanese forces. Franklin Delano Roosevelt coined the term the arsenal of democracy to describe an aggressive plan of ramping up war efforts at a pace never seen before. A number of industrial centers played critical roles in this, including Cleveland, Philadelphia, Chicago, and Pittsburgh, but the powerhouse was undoubtedly Detroit. That's because the major car manufacturers at the time were able to convert their factories from making cars to making armaments. And this is where I have to introduce you to Cast Iron Charlie. Charlie Sorensen was born in Denmark and migrated to the US with his family in 1883. He eventually found his way to Ford Motors, where he quickly earned Henry Ford's trust and worked his way up the corporate ladder. Henry Ford reluctantly agreed to help build the B-24s, and he put the responsibility of making it happen directly on Sorensen.
So Henry, as World War II was approaching, was famously anti-war, and he didn't want to support it. At one point, he didn't even want to make vehicles for the war, and then he slowly came around. And it seems like Edsel was the driving force behind really getting that going. Henry is well enshrined in history. Everybody knows his name, but not as many people know Edsel's name. What's your thoughts on Edsel not perhaps not getting the recognition he deserves in history for his role in really helping Ford bring that plant online?
Well, I think Edsel might be saddled with the burden of the Edsel car that was a complete flop. And Edsel was a driving force. In the spring of 1940, Roosevelt made his famous 50,000 airplanes a year speech, and contracts started going out. And Ford got the contract to build the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, and Sorensen and Edsel were all excited about building this engine. And then Henry said, no, it's going to the British. I hate the British, and the British will just get us involved in a war like they did back 20 years ago, and I'm not going to build it. And Knudsen, who took over this whole mobilization of the auto industry, went to Packard, and Packard said, yes, we'll build it. So the Rolls-Royce Merlin Packard engine was originally given to Ford. And then as the war in Europe, they invaded Russia, and things are really starting to go bad. Henry felt, if I don't cooperate with the federal government, they're going to nationalize my factory and take it away from me. So then he turned Edsel and Sorensen loose, and they got together with a guy named Jimmy Doolittle and elected that Ford would take on building the B-24 bomber because it was the most complex project. And it was the one the Army wanted the most because this B-24 bomber was better than the B-17. And in fact, Jimmy Doolittle had an office here in Detroit for about 14 months before he went to Washington to plan his raid on Tokyo. And he was instrumental in getting the auto industry into building airplane parts and engines and airplanes.
The B-24s would go on to play a pivotal role in the war, sinking numerous German U-boats and performing numerous combat missions into Germany.
And something that, again, is one of those glamour things. One of the roles that the B-24 did that didn't get much publicity, the Army Air Force, they wanted to bomb people. They wanted to bomb the Japs. They wanted to bomb the Germans. And the major crisis facing Europe was the German submarine fleet. So they turned their B-24s over to the Navy. And the Navy put microwave radar on them where they could detect these boats at 25 miles out at night when they were recharging their batteries. And within 3 months of introducing the B-24s in the North Atlantic, Hitler withdrew the submarines from the North Atlantic because he was losing 2 boats for every boat they sank.
So safe
and
to say.
The B-24 was the airplane that could do it because it could carry more weight. So they took half the bomb bay and made it gas tanks. That airplane could stay in the air 20 hours and go out 1,000 miles to look for those submarines.
So safe to say the factory and by extension, the B-24 had a pretty important role in the war.
Oh, yes.
One thing that I came across as I was just reading more into this is the healthy, lively debate of the B-24 versus the B-17, and they both had pros and cons. What's your take on that debate of the B-24 versus the B-17?
I'm a B-17 pilot, so I love the B-17 also. And I think it's the Air Force publicity machine, particularly put together by Bernie Lay and Cy Bartlett, who did the movie 12 O'Clock High, that glamorized the B-17 operations out of England. And the B-17 was a rugged airplane and took a lot of combat. But the B-24 delivered more bombs, flew more missions, shot down more airplanes, and ruled the Pacific. The B-17 was a minor player in the Pacific, but the B-24, because of its range, was widely used in the Pacific. In the Mediterranean, almost all of the bomber forces coming out of the Mediterranean were B-24s, and a large majority of them built by the PR aspect of the Army Air Forces with the B-17 flying out of England, and kind of a glamorous time.
Yeah, they both played important roles. It's kind of arguing over 2 really important planes.
Well, and another thing is too, the B-17 is a nice, stable platform to fly. It is a nice airplane.
But before even a single one was made, there was a big problem. The company that was making these bombers were struggling to get them made. They didn't even have blueprints of the planes and were essentially making them on the spot. When Sorensen visited the consolidated factory, he immediately saw a plethora of problems in their manufacturing processes, but even more importantly, he saw a way on how Ford's assembly process for making vehicles could also apply to bombers. He went to his hotel that night and drew a sketch on a napkin for how the plant could be laid out. He then convinced the Fords to go forward with the plan, as well as getting the government to commit $200 million for it, which is about $4 billion today. Even with a government contract in hand and one of the smartest manufacturers in the world at the helm, the project started off on a bumpy road. They originally had plans to get production to a bomber an hour, but in the first 2 years, they were only making a small fraction of that.
And at the beginning, they weren't anywhere close to that for several bottlenecks. Do you think that there was a defining moment on when they were able to figure it out and ultimately get to that bomber an hour production level?
Well, the story goes in there. When they said they could build a bomber an hour, that's what Sorensen said when he told the government he wanted the contract to build the airplane. But nobody had considered what you had to do to build a bomber an hour. And it was really a convoluted mess. Consolidated owned the airplane. The Army Air Force thought that they could direct how the airplane would be built. Ford Motor Company in Dearborn thought they ran the plant. And the guy in the plant didn't have any authority to do anything to build bombers. And they were so convoluted that in late 42, Harry Truman and his Defense Department investigative team came in to look for corruption and graft at Willow Run to see why they were taking all this government money and not building any airplanes. And they found out that even second lieutenants at Wright Pat could call up and say, I want the hydraulic line on engine number 3 shifted from the left side to the right side because of battle damage. And he had the authority to shut down the assembly line while they changed the hydraulic lines on the B-24 bombers. And the Truman Committee said, you need a plant dictator that nobody can tell what to do. And he builds bombers. And Edsel was close to dying at that time. And he appointed Meade Bricker. Meade Bricker had been very successful with the R2800 Ford engine built down in Dearborn. And he took over the factory. And he instituted what he called the 505 program. We're going to build 505 bombers a month. And I can't get people to come to the factory. I'm going to farm out. And this is something Sorensen wanted to do. He wanted to keep all the production in the factory. And Bricker said, we can't do it. We can't get people to come here. We're going to farm the building out to other people and then do the final assembly here at Willow Run. And he took over in like February of 43. And by the spring of 44, they were cranking out a bomber an hour. And they had the capability to go down to one every 45 minutes. They had really defined what production would be.
Compared with all the red tape and bureaucracy we face today, it's crazy to think how a sketch on the back of a napkin combined with a conceptual plan to build a bomber an hour put the wheels in motion on this massive project. The building wasn't required to make bombers following the end of the war, so it went on a curvy path of its own over the next several decades.
So after the war was finished, there wasn't the need to make B-24s at scale anymore. So then it was Kaiser Frazer that occupied it for a while, and then GM occupied it for a while. When was it officially decommissioned? Was that 2010 when the last use was in there?
A little bit of convoluted history here. They offered the plant to Ford Motor Company, but Ford was in such dire straits financially because Henry didn't keep any financial records. And when Henry the Deuce came in, he had to get organized. And he says, I think we have too much capacity right now. We don't need that factory. So the government gave it to the University of Michigan for $1. And then the University of Michigan sold it to Kaiser Frazer, who built cars and airplanes there until 1953 when they went out of business. And about the same time, General Motors transmission plant burnt down in Livonia, Michigan. And this empty factory was there. And they moved in and had production back up in 90 days. And they ran until 2010 in that factory. In fact, they had spent over $1 billion modernizing that factory in 2007 and 2008 before the bankruptcy of 2008. and they elected to close the factory at that time and consolidate their transmissions at another factory.
So why was there no one stepping up to take that building on? Was it just, if it had $1 billion invested into it, it seems like it should have been a suitable building for some other company.
Well, it was so big that nobody could use it, and it was like one plug, one water main, one gas main. And if you wanted to subdivide the factory, you had to find all of these utilities and build it up and stuff like that. And it was an older plant. It wasn't, shall we say, energy efficient, for the environment and et cetera. It'd be a lot of money spent on it. And after trying to subdivide it and find people, in 2013, they started tearing it down.
And how long did that process take to demolish the whole?
It took about a year.
And there's a 144,000 square foot building still left over that's being used as a museum now?
Well, the last 300 feet of the assembly line was preserved, the 144,000 square feet. And the Yankee Air Museum here at Willow Run Airport, now known as the Michigan Flight Museum, was going to turn it into a museum. But the airport elected to abandon the west side of the airport, which meant we couldn't operate airplanes out of this hangar. And we found out that it was monumental to get a certificate of occupancy. We're talking in the 20 to 25 million range to get a C of O for that building. And it just wasn't practical to spend that money for that museum.
So is it just empty now? Is that building being used for anything?
It's used for storage. We have some historic artifact airplanes in the factory right now.
So if somebody wanted to just learn more about either the factory or the production of the B-24, are there any resources available right now or anywhere that people can see about it?
There's a tremendous amount that's been written about that factory and the people that worked there. There's even been mystery murder novels written about working in the factory by a guy who worked there. Most of my information came from the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, where the archives of the factory are kept. And there's a lot of information about the production, the problems they had in production, the biographies of the men who were involved in building the factory. And that was a major source of the information I had on writing my book.
It's a shame this monumental factory was largely demolished, but fortunately there is a museum on site which offers a glimpse into the past.
We have quite a complex setup already at Willow Run Airport. We've got a 30,000 square foot hangar that we keep our flyable airplanes in. Very modern facility. We give rides in our bombers and our transport airplanes, our Huey helicopter from Vietnam. We have about a 40 to 50,000 square foot museum where we have airplanes on display and dioramas showing what went on at Willow Run, of the Rosies building the airplane, stuff like that. So we have a museum that is a viable museum. It just can't move into that bomber plant.
Makes sense. And I did see that. What's the name of that the museum again? Because I think I did see the website on that.
It used to be the Yankee Air Museum, but we've changed the name to reflect more what we are. It's now called the Michigan Flight Museum. And you can go to their website and find out all about what we do.
I'll make sure I direct people that way. And at some point, I'm going to make my way to Detroit, and for the sole purpose of coming to see that, because I'd love to just see what that site looked like, even though it's no longer there, but just to try and envision it and match it up against some historic pictures, just to appreciate how large and important that factory was. So
it's an amazing thing. If you come here, I'll take you for a ride in my airplane. We'll fly over the site. You can still see the outline of all the sections of the building where they haven't torn the concrete up or the floors up. And you can see that size of that factory. Now, they publish roads and make bridges and stuff on parts of it, but a lot of the outline of that factory is still there.
I'm going to take you up on that. I would absolutely love to do that. That'd be a world-class experience. So I will take you up on doing that. One last question I have for you. Do you have any, I know we mentioned last time that or when we were messaging back and forth, you might have some blueprints of the building. Do you have anything else that you could share, any historic images or footage or anything that I could include in the video I'm making?
I've got, I think it's a collection, I can find them, of pictures of the plant as it's being demolished. And I can send you those. And it's just been, I've been in such a hectic schedule. I'm putting a new engine in my airplane, which constantly takes up all my time. And then I'm writing another book about Operation Market Time in Vietnam, where I flew for the Navy. And I had a deadline to get that to my publisher by October 1st. So I've just been overwhelmed. But as soon as we sign off here, I'll try to find that stuff. I've got your email. I'll send it to you.
That would be perfect. And I will be the first customer when that book comes out. I love the one that you wrote on Willow Run. I'll be your first customer for the one on Vietnam.
I've read a number of books on World War II factories and bombers and Henry Ford and Charlie Sorensen and the Willow Run Bomber Plant specifically. And there were so many other amazing storylines I came across. For example, the pivotal role that women played in World War II, including the famous Rosie the Riveter imagery. There could also be a whole video devoted to Albert Kahn, an architect that deserves to be mentioned in the same conversation as Frank Lloyd Wright, but sadly, he is a footnote in history as well. Or how Detroit went from being a powerhouse of a city to one teetering on collapse and now back to its present-day resurgence. And of course, there are countless other stories about all the companies and people who played a fundamental role back in World War II. If there's one of these topics in particular you'd like me to cover, leave a comment below. And if you want to read any of these books, I'll put a list of them all in the description as well. And since Randy's book is one I would enthusiastically recommend, it's only suiting that I leave the final word to him.
Yeah, and I have something called the Willow Run curse. I've never escaped Willow Run. I've left Detroit and Willow Run, but when I got out of the Navy, the first job I got was at Willow Run. The second job I got was at Willow Run. And then the third job I got, I had to come out to Willow Run to get trained to fly the airplane they had. And then I moved out of state and I lost my job out of state. And the only job I could find was at Willow Run. And that company went out of business. And the next job I could find was at Willow Run. And I retired from my job at Willow Run about 4 months ago.
So it's part of your DNA at this point.
Yeah, my father was working there when I was born, and I'm just tagged to Willow Run.